Okay, so now we've covered apertures and hopefully you have a better understanding of that. It's time to talk about the shutter speeds. Now the shutter speed is built into your camera body. So this is controlled by the camera, not the lens, the camera body. And the shutter speed is exactly how fast the shutter opens and closes to allow the amount of light that's going through the aperture again to hit the sensor. Okay, so we're talking about with aperture, it's the amount of light. With shutter speeds, it's how long the light is hitting the sensor. And we are talking about seconds here, sometimes fractions of a second, sometimes up to 30 seconds long. And so this is a very important part of getting your exposure correct. This is a look of a shutter. This is a mechanism that is usually, we can't open our digital cameras, but in a film camera you can open up the back of the camera and you can actually press the shutter release button and you will see the shutter open and close. And this happens very, very quickly. It very rarely breaks. So that's a very fortunate thing. They've kind of exacted the construction of this, but this is kind of what it looks like just to give you an idea. And here's a graph. Depending upon your camera, why don't you go ahead and set it to the S or TV mode. S meaning shutter, TV time priority. And you can move when you're in that shooting mode. Your camera will allow you to select your desired shutter speed, and the camera will figure out the appropriate aperture for whatever shutter speed you're on. So let's put it on those shooting modes. Again, it's going to be annotated with an S or a TV. Okay. Now, when you move your main dial, this is not the shooting mode dial, which is on the top. This is usually on the front or where your thumb is on the back of your camera. And when you rotate that, you will see your numbers change. And they will go, you may be able to go faster than 1/4000th of a second. I think there might be 1/6000th of a second. That is very fast. I mean, I wonder if we blink that fast. 1/4000th is a lot, is very, very fast. And then scroll down all the way to the other end and you may start seeing like the inch symbol on your dial. When you see that, we're talking about full seconds. If you don't see that little, quotation mark inch symbol, then you're looking at fractions of a second. Back in the old days, the fastest shutter speed was about 500. And then with the modern 35 millimeter cameras, 1/1000th of a second. And then with digital, it's just been getting faster and faster. Not sure where they're going to stop, but these are the oldest, the fullest. It's not even showing the full list here. These are with the advancements. Again, we now have half stops and third stops. So let's talk about where these are and what they do. Okay, so again, we're looking at the back of your camera screen. I will tell you, I don't think I mentioned this before, but I don't shoot looking at the back of my screen. It really drains your battery, and I prefer to look like a professional photographer and look through the lens finder there. One thing I want to tell you guys, you see how there's a little rotating wheel on some of your cameras here. It's right the same. This can get out of whack. So if you're looking through your camera and you're like, nothing's in focus, play with this little dial and you may see that that's kind of gone out of focus, but it's a kind of a corrector for your viewfinder. Excuse me. So we're looking here, what's highlighted in all of these photos is the shutter speed. And again, most of the time you're going to see the fraction. It's going to indicate that it's a fraction of a second, but here it does not, but it also does not have the inch symbols anywhere. So I know that that's a fraction of a second. And you will become very familiar with these numbers again. After a week or so, you will understand what you're looking at. The other thing, now that we're looking at the shutter speed and it shows us our f-stop, always your f-stop's going to be on the right, your shutter speed's going to be on the left. That's one thing the camera manufacturers have all agreed upon, that where those are located. Okay, ISOs are always going to say ISO next to it. But even if you look at this light meter versus this light meter, it's different. So they haven't agreed on everything. So movement is a really kind of interesting subject matter, and that's what we're looking at this week. Here, it really doesn't matter what you photograph. There's no nothing specific I want you to shoot. The only requirement is that you're photographing movement. So you're either showing movement as this photograph is showing us, or you're stopping the action. Okay, so this is showing movement. I don't know much, but I know that this train is on the go. Now, is it coming into the station? Is it leaving? Or is it an express train? That I don't know. But this man is standing still, right, because he's sharp, and the train is what's moving. One thing that's important when you're photographing moving things is you want something to be sharp. If everything's blurry, well, then you just have a blurry photograph. But if something's in focus and something's blurry, that indicates that blurry object is moving. Okay, so this, what I would probably say is this is about maybe 1/60th of a second, around that. And the reason I choose 1/60th of a second is for a reason. The camera manufacturers got together and they decided to tell the world, you and me, anyone who uses a camera, that anything slower than 1/60th of a second, you need to use a tripod. And they can't guarantee that the image is going to be in focus. Because even at below 1/60th of a second, breathing can blurry your image. So, and if you try to like hold your breath and stand still, you end up shaking more. The rule is that if you go below 1/60th of a second, let's say you go to 1/45th of a second or 1/30th of a second, you exhale instead of inhale. You try to steady yourself. If you have to go way below that, you know, I've used the top of my car. I've placed my camera on top of my camera bag on the ground. Anything that will steady it, a bench, you know, whatever I can come up with. It's kind of creative problem solving if your light is indicating that you need to be below 1/60th of a second. Either use a tripod or figure out a way to steady it. So I'm just guessing, but I'm thinking this thing is moving fairly fast. So I think at 1/25th of a second it may not be as blurry, but you just are going to have to play around a little bit because it all depends upon the lighting and, you know, how much of lighting is let you through. Now, looking at this photograph, there's a couple things I can tell right off the bat. The photograph has a large depth of field, so I'm being told, because everything looks pretty sharp in this photograph. So that's telling me the large depth of field. So it's probably like an f16 or higher. But the shutter speed is open long enough for people to run. This is steel wool that's on fire that they're kind of swinging around on a steel kind of chain, and it's doing this kind of fire effect. It's a good idea to do this effect near water, just in case. But the shutter is open long enough for this to happen over a long period of time because they're running like 50 yards. So how long does it take a normal person to run 50 yards while swinging a burning steel wool rope? I would say, I don't know, 15 seconds? Something like that. You definitely would need a tripod for this type. You cannot hold a camera still for 15 seconds. You can get tripods fairly inexpensively at Walmart, but I will tell you, the more you spend on a tripod, the better, the heavier it is. This one this photograph is a very famous photograph. The bullet has gone through the apple. The apple hasn't quite exploded yet because it will disintegrate into mush. But this is probably at 1,000th of a second, maybe 1/2000th of a second. The shutters weren't that fast back then when this was taken. I think it's late 70s, possibly early 80s when this photograph was taken. But this is stopping action. That bullet is forever now frozen as it exits the apple. This is stop action. So the ones we were looking at previously were slow, long exposures. These are fast. They're up there around the higher numbers. This very famous photograph of local hero Michael Jordan, flying through the air, this again is a fast shutter speed. I would say at least 1,000th of a second, if not higher. Okay. Now in the arena, the light is actually pretty bad. All the light is concentrated on the court, and this photographer is slightly, he's sitting on the floor, slightly tilting the camera up into the dark space, but there's enough light on Michael to make him a really good exposure. But if you look, oops, I didn't mean to go backwards. If you look back here, we really can't see detail. And this is when I tell you we don't really care about that. What we care about is him. Look how high up he is. That's what we care about. So there are times when you have to think about, my subject matter is Michael jumping through the air. Nothing else matters. Okay. And here he's forever suspended, stopped. The action has stopped. This is the same photograph. It's just got different shutter speeds. Smooth water, beautiful water running down the river. You've seen these photographs. It almost looks ghostly, kind of, whoa, all crazy here. Kind of like this. But when you stop, or when you speed up the shutter speed, this water looks almost like, overrunning water from a hard rain, rather than a beautiful waterfall. Right? They have totally different feelings. The exposures are each okay. They just have a different effect. They just look different because of the shutter speed. This photograph is what we call camera, I'm spacing here. This is called camera shake. Sorry about that. So your camera's moving. You cannot hold it still long enough to make the exposure. I still think it's kind of cool looking. Their safety helmets look like samurai hats, and so the effect is kind of cool. It's just one picture on your memory card. If try to take it, just don't waste a whole memory card trying to get it, because it just may not happen. Another thing that can be done concerning with movement is called panning. Panning is when the camera moves with the moving subject matter. So you literally are either traveling alongside this motorcyclist, or your camera is rotating in the same direction and at the same speed as the thing you're photographing that's moving. So that moving object looks sharp, but everything else looks blurry. There's only so much you can really do with this panning technique, but I enjoyed this photograph. If you're interested in portrait photography, what a great way, and to show childhood in this photograph. And her smile is really great. It's better than it not swinging, right? So shutter speed is how fast the shutter opens and closes, and it controls what movement we record.